A battered spotlight falls on a lone figure backstage. Sweat and grease paint streak his face, though he no longer jumps into crowds or lacerates himself on broken glass. Iggy Pop, the once ferocious punk godfather, stands in the hushed emptiness of a dressing room. The roar of distant applause is long gone. Only echoes of the past remain.
But, you know, you got to start somewhere.
Oh, yeah, I mean, with the spiderwebs, was it a pleasant experience in any way?
No.
He is older now, stooped a little by age and scars. And as he looks into the mirror, the lines on his face shimmer with memories. He was born James Osterberg, Jr., on a stormy April night in 1947, in a trailer park outside Detroit. His father was a high school English teacher and baseball coach, tall and serious. His mother a nurse, gentle and soft-spoken. Their life was ordinary, Midwestern Sundays at church, backyard barbecues and school rules. But James was different. Even as a toddler, he resisted quiet. At 5 years old, he wasn't reading poems at breakfast, but hammering rubber pads into a slapstick beat. His parents, kind and bemused, indulged this odd child's passion. They gave him a proper drum kit, and in that cramped trailer, even yielded their own bedroom so he could play. By the time he reached high school, there was already a tension inside him, a restless current underneath the surface of this clean-cut boy. In the leafy streets of suburban Michigan, he found himself an outsider among affluent neighbors. He was scrawny, had freckles, and eyes that seemed to search for something invisible. While friends listened to Motown on the radio, he caught his first taste of American blues and garage rock. He started to dye his hair from brown to shock blonde, playing drums in teenage bands with names like the Iguanas and the Prime Movers. The Iguanas nicknamed him Iggy. It stuck, a sharper, wilder name than James Osterberg. Even then, he was bursting at the seams with more music than a humble trailer could contain. The 1960s rolled on like thunder in Detroit. Young James, now Iggy, was pulling at the threads of convention. He dropped out of college and moved to Chicago to chase the blues. But something else was forming. In 1967, back in Ann Arbor, he found his calling. Alongside guitarist Ron Ashton and two other misfits, he formed the psychedelic Stooges. At first, the band called themselves Psychedelic, but soon dropped the word, letting their raw power speak for itself. The Stooges played anywhere, everywhere. Church basements, frat parties, abandoned warehouses. Iggy was up front, a feral howl from his lips, pounding drums abandoned for a microphone. As the late 60s counterculture swirled around them, the Stooges stood apart. Their music was primitive and menacing, a grinding collision of blues riffs and punk attitude before punk existed. While their peers chased pretty melodies and summer of love slogans, the Stooges were painting with a darker palette. At gigs, Iggy would bare himself, sometimes literally, bruising his chest with a microphone, gasping like an animal in pain, dipping his body into the audience like a wounded fish thrashing on land. Fans would clutch him, fearing and exhilarated. The lines between singer and crowd blurred in a whirlwind of sweat and stage blood. They recorded their first album in 1969. It sold a handful of copies, too unpolished for a commercial world that wanted gloss. They toured relentlessly. Detroit became their breeding ground. A new album, Fun House, in 1970, barely registered on the charts, but it was pure thunder. The band's reputation spread as wild and unpredictable. Then Raw Power in 1973, produced by rock visionaire David Bowie, brought Iggy's raw voice and shuddering guitar riffs to more ears. In those years, he sang verses like a prophecy of his own life. I'm a street-walking cheetah with a heart full of napalm. I am the world's forgotten boy. It was as if he knew even then how lonely the path would be. But success never arrived in the way they dreamed. Each album sold just enough to keep the lights on, but not to lift them onto triumphant charts. The mainstream turned up its nose. Detroit's finest was still a backyard act to them. Disappointments piled up. The band's internal bonds frayed as hallucinogens and misfits took hold. By 1974, the Stooges' fire was snuffed out. Their bassist sacked the frontman on tour, labeling his heroin habit a danger. The music stopped. The end of the Stooges marked the start of Iggy's personal abyss. He wrote songs for soundtracks, sometimes surprising himself by how well they fit a movie scene. A slowed-down guitar vamp he recorded became the background for paparazzi pictures in Train Spotting years after he made it. Occasionally, he'd find himself the unlikely hit of a commercial, a glimpse of mainstream recognition. Someone heard Lust for Life over an ad for a luxury car, and younger fans sniffed him out anew. He puzzled at it. Had Lust for Life really become a feel-good anthem? Through the 80s and 90s, music journalists occasionally called him never a has-been, always an icon. But Iggy knew the truth. Very little of this life had the sheen of the rock fantasies. He hated that phrase about being ahead of its time, even if it fit him. His gritty anthems about suburban malaise and inner turmoil were only really understood decades later. He told a music magazine in the 2000s that people listened to him because it's lonely out there. That loneliness, both his and his listeners, was his currency. As the 90s turned to the millennium, Iggy Pop found a kind of quiet resurgence. He was finally old enough that he could be celebrated without hurting the urchin punk fantasy. His name adorned festival posters. Teenagers tattooed Stooges lyrics on their arms. In 2003, he reformed the Stooges with surviving members and played sweaty punk revival shows around the world, finally thrilling the mainstream sort of approval he'd always flouted. In 2010, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but these honors felt bittersweet. The Stooges' original drummer, Scott Asheton, had died in 2014. Ron Asheton had already died in 2009. Some of the roaring young faces in the crowd were generations younger, seeing him as something between a relic and a hero. Meanwhile, Iggy himself was aging. He never wanted to be the tender, elder statesman of rock. He'd come from an era of reckless youth, and for a long time, fought to stay there. But by his late 70s, the party had finally hit back. His body creaked. By 2010, he joked about Carnegie Hall being the only place he'd want to end his stage diving career, not because it was holy, but because he had broken so many bones doing it. In 2019, he admitted candidly, "My skeleton is the weak area," casually pulling out a cane backstage. He started to turn down tours and now relies on modest covers to keep the muscle memory alive rather than risking another fall. He once parried a stage jumper, flipping out his knee. Scars on his arms are dark reminders of glass he once flung into the crowd, of collars he broke. Even his once razor voice has weathered. It still rumbles, still tears through a song like Liquid Gravel. But in recent interviews, he's joked it sounds like Shrek after a Halloween party. His vision is imperfect, ruined by long nights of IV drugs. Some days he emerges from his Miami home late morning to dip into Biscayne Bay waters, his pool therapy, as he calls it, trying to soothe the wear of decades. He now wears a thick tan from the Florida sun. His face is bronzed like old metal. The photographer Ryan McGinley noted Iggy in his 70s could still appear like a classical bronze statuette, sinewy as a warrior and unforgiving as fate. In the twilight of this remarkable career, he is both venerated and misunderstood. Arena crowds chant his lyrics, but he remains defiantly alone with his music in the quiet. He lives with his wife, Nina Alu, a kind former flight attendant who tended to him through late tours and who he married in 2008. They keep pets, a parrot named Biggie among them, and he even made a radio show recommending songs to listeners. He has a spirit house near Miami, where he retreats to read old pulp novels and sketch dreamscapes. But much of his life is spent on the road, driving his vintage cars through night cities, as if chasing ghosts. In those moments back on stage, even in his 70s, he gives all that's left. With a mic in hand and cane set aside, he still arches his body into the crowd, a living metaphor for his life's trajectory. He throws himself into adoration but comes up empty-handed. His trademark maniacal grin never fully reaches his eyes anymore. There's a weary smile, yes, but shadow behind it. A memory of pain, defeat, and bewilderment. Iggy Pop's story is one of collision. The everyday boy against the gods of rock. The flesh against the fire of fame. The rebel crying out in the void. He never fit, even as others later worshipped the shape he took. His art was violent and vulnerable all at once. A blue-collar howl from one who felt powerless. A raw testament that sometimes the most potent rebellion is simply to bleed a little and stay alive. Tonight, as he finally steps away from the mirror and out toward the darkened venue, he carries his history etched into each bone. And even as an ovation waits somewhere beyond the curtain, he knows he remains, inevitably, inescapably, both worshipped and alone. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe with notifications on to never miss a video.